Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name is Robert Whitelaw and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please don't hold that against me. Welcome to it, folks. If you were to judge by the background sounds you're hearing right now, you might think that today's topic was going to be quiet meditation as you're enjoying the sound of the waves lapping against the beach here in the island of Oahu. The Pacific is right in front of me. I'm staring out at the horizon with water as far as the eye can see. Very relaxing. As many of you know who've been listening to the show for a while, I have an investment property that I currently use as a vacation rental on Oahu, and that is where I am. It's one of my usual visits where I come and I just basically do an assessment of the property, figure out what needs fixing, anything that might need replacing, that kind of stuff, and then I take care of it. And I thought, what better time to discuss the options when you're looking at a buy and hold property. Now, we cover all the approaches possible, really, when it comes to buy and hold strategies. We've talked about how to decide what your strategy should be based on your needs. I wanted to get down to the gears of differences really between the two things, because there are some pretty clear differences and there's some very clear advantages. But the advantages that you get really are very dependent on how you've purchased the property, what the property has, the desirability of the location for vacation rentals, those kinds of things. So I wanted to get into it a little bit. The last couple of weeks have been amazing. I've been here for a little over a week. The week before that was me spending a lot of time which is going to sound odd, fooling around with drones. I like the drone technology in terms of taking photos. I don't think it's as impactful as an awful lot of people seem to think, but it's sexy and it's fun. It's fun to drive those drones around. So I have a drone that I've been working with to sort of test things out, and I may do a show on drones. I don't know who would care about hearing about drones, but there's a variety of options out there, and what's amazing to me is if you are a property owner, if you own a lot of properties, or if you're a real estate agent and you want to do drone photography of your properties, the cheapest I've seen folks willing to do drone photography of properties is right around $170, and they'll only give you 7 photos with that particular package. And if you're someone who's doing listings even vaguely regularly, if you're only doing one a month, it only takes about 6 months to 8 months, even if it just takes a year, for you to have spent enough money so that you could have purchased yourself a really nice drone that could handle an awful lot of conditions. You can get a really great drone right now for about $1,000 that'll do everything you could possibly want: 1080, self-stabilization, all this wonderful stuff. For you to do drone photography. And the difference is you can take video, you can take as many photos as you want. If you don't like the photos after you've reviewed them, you can go out and do it again, whereas you'd have to pay that money again over and over again. So anyway, I realize I've digressed a little bit here, but I'm finding the drone thing fun, not only because it gives me complete power over when the photos get taken, how the photos get taken, what photos I get to keep and what photos I don't. I'm not forced to continue to use these 7 photos because those are the only ones I get unless I'm willing to pay for another visit, but something to think about, and it's ridiculously easy to get good with those drones. And as I mentioned, for about $1,000, you can get yourself a Mavic DJI Pro for about $1,000. The Pro 2 only adds 4K. That's pointless. Okay, I'm sorry. I am now officially in the weeds. All right, so maybe I'll do a show about that at some point, or an extra something on drones, because that was kind of fun stuff. Let's get back to the point of today's show, which is kind of comparing strategies when you're adhering to a long-term investment strategy. Now, for those of you who've been listening for a while, you know I tend to be a buy and hold guy. However, I do strongly suggest that when you do have a property that you own, and let's say you're currently holding it as a buy and hold, I think it's important for you to, in the absence of any amazing world-changing or community-changing events, review the status of your property at least once a year. I do that typically January, February, first quarter of the year on all my properties, and get a feel for where things are. Do I feel like I need to make a change? if you see, but don't let that be it. Put that on your calendar as something that you put a half a day aside for you to crunch the numbers and figure out what makes sense. But also, if you see something crazy happen in your community, if you suddenly see a ton of apartment complexes getting built in April and May, don't say, well, I'm not going to worry about that till I do my yearly review. Review it immediately to figure out whether or not you think that's going to impact your property, because it might be something that it would inspire you to change your strategy, right? So just always be aware, I think, of what your market is. But when you're acquiring that first first property where you're planning to hold it for a long time, or that 20th one, you need to jump through the same hoops. And I think it's smart to be aware of the burdens that are different between those two properties. So let's start with, we'll lead with the sexiest piece of information. Why would you choose one over the other? What is the primary motivation between doing a vacation rental versus doing a long-term rental? Well, a long-term rental is a little bit less of a headache, right? You only have to really go out and find a renter when your current tenant says they're going to leave. The average person moves every 3 to 4 years. In some areas, depending on your local markets, there are markets where that number is shorter, and there's markets where that number is longer. Again, something you should be aware of in your local market. So the headache is lesser, right? You may occasionally have to field a phone call relating to getting a toilet fixed, or a leak, or a broken window, or whatever, but that's typically it. And you can count on, hopefully, if you've selected your tenant wisely, a regular monthly check that is, hopefully, again, going to be positive cash flow for you. Now, let's consider an alternative, because this adds an element to your equation that can completely change your decision whether or not you're going to buy a property or not. Now, and let's use my property as an example. So I'm currently it's about a 600 square foot condo in Hawaii. Nothing amazing about the unit itself, other than it's a corner unit, so it's got L-shaped balcony going throughout the whole property, outside the whole property. I am right on the water. So as I'm talking to you, I'm looking at the Pacific Ocean. I can look over my left shoulder and I can look back and see the mountains of Hawaii. There's no street between me and the ocean. Literally, once I get out of the elevator downstairs, I am, 50 steps to the ocean. I'm in the water. If I could put a zip line out my balcony if the HOA would let me, and I could be on the beach in about 5 seconds. So, in terms of answering the question, what's the appeal of this particular property? Well, that's it, right? In the world of tropical island vacations, if you can manage it, if I'm searching, think of yourself in that scenario as the renter, as the vacationer, right? If you're going to Hawaii, do you want to be 5 miles away from the water, or do you want to be right on the water, right? Well, the desirability is right there. So while for some folks the cost may be prohibitive to get those properties right on the water, my property, in terms of other properties that are in this marketplace, is very competitive. So in terms of people showing an interest in this area, very high. I would rate it as an A property in terms of the desirability of people wanting to come here to vacation, right, regardless of time of year. And there's research you can do relating to that. You can go up and go to, say, VRBO, which is where I have my unit available for rent, and simply search the areas you're interested in, that you're considering investing in, and get an idea of what things are renting for. And you'll find single-family residential properties, you'll find condos, you'll find all kinds of different properties. And you can get an idea of how well they rent. So find out what the rate is, and then go into their calendar as if you're going to book something, and judging on the amount of availability, you can get an idea of how robust the rental market is. So, example, go up to VRBO, go vrbo.com, select the area that you're interested in, start browsing through, find ones that look appealing to you, and then click book and see what dates you can book, right? And typically the calendar that's going to be presented to you is going to show blocked out dates. And normally those are dates that the unit's been rented. So you can get and do this for a bunch of different properties. Don't do this for just one, but do it for a bunch in the marketplace that would be competitors to a property you might be interested in buying. So what I would suggest is to make this a step in any evaluation you do on a property that you're planning on buying, regardless of whether or not you've made the decision on whether it's going to be a long-term rental or a short-term rental. And here's why. One of the big payoffs for a vacation rental is that, in my case anyway, I am making at least 3 times more than what I would make if I was renting it month to month. In fact, if I was renting this property month to month, given what long-term rentals go for, I would be in negative cash flow. So if you're using a spreadsheet to calculate and do the math, because remember, these investment properties are all a math problem, you need to add a new page or a new column for you to plug in your numbers and figure out whether or not it makes sense as a rental, as a vacation rental. Because you may come across a deal where it makes absolutely no sense in terms of being a long-term rental. There are tons of properties in this building where my unit is, other properties I've seen up and down the King Cam Highway, and I check all these properties when I see them come on the market, that would make no sense to purchase if you want to do a long-term rental, but could absolutely make sense as a vacation rental. Now, of course, there are disadvantages, but making 3 times what would be your normal rent. Let me give you an example. I just rented that. Once I leave here, the next renter after me will be someone who is renting the unit for 30 days. They're renting it for an entire month, but they're paying 3 times what they would normally pay if they did a month-to-month rental long term, right? So that's a big deal. In terms of your cash flow, in terms of what you can project you will earn. Now, you're going to also, I've talked to quite a few property manager folks here on this island. When I first purchased this property, I talked to an awful lot of them. They want an awful lot of money to manage your property. I was getting numbers anywhere from 25 to 35%. Yes, you heard me right. 35% for these property managers to manage your property. With the idea being, I think that they expect a higher level of compensation because someone will have to come out and meet the people, give them the keys, all that kind of hands-on stuff. I am not paying 25%. I'm not paying 35%. I'm paying about half. I'm paying about 10%. But I am owning the majority of the process. My property manager, the only thing they do is greet and hand off keys. Now, let me touch on another subject that I think we've talked about here on the show before. If you're going to do a vacation rental, you need to, I think personally, that you need to very carefully decide whether or not you're going to have someone manage the property to the point where they're the ones who are bringing in the renters. And here's why. None of the property management firms I talked to did not have their own properties to rent, meaning that every single property manager that I would have to pay a percentage to also had properties of their own that they wanted to get rented. Now, if you reach out to a property manager who's looking for a place to rent and they earn a percentage, and so that's one element of it, and they own their own properties, in what order do you think they will point renters towards properties? So the very first thing they'll do is point them towards the properties they hold. The second thing they'll do is point them to the properties that are priced higher than yours based on the idea that they will get a higher percentage and therefore a bigger paycheck. There is a whole lot of not in your best interest elements built into a relationship with a property manager when it comes to vacation rentals. So you need to keep that in mind. So I have not delegated the majority in my relationship. I take care of all of the bookings. I do it all through VRBO. And it's worked out amazingly well for me. Let me give you a real world example of what I'm talking about, specifically to this property. So prior to my owning this property, my parents owned it, and they tried to rent it during the 90s. The rental market was super robust at that time. In fact, people could even argue it was more robust then than it is now in a lot of ways, particularly since there were fewer options on this side of the island. Now there's a Marriott hotel just up the street, so the competition is a little bit more stiff, and people and the reasons to come to this side of the island, aside from just the amazing beauty, one of them being the Polynesian Cultural Center and the North Shore area, this Marriott hotel is practically on the campus for the Polynesian Cultural Center, and it is closer to the North Shore area. So I have a lot more competition now than they did then. Rewind to the 90s, and this was advice I was giving my parents at the time when they were trying to rent it. Their unit was not renting at all. And the property manager they had at the time had their own properties in the same building that they were trying to get rented. So, of course, that person rented their properties first. That does not work well for you if you're the person who owns that property. They were only renting maybe I know their vacancy rate was like 90%, 95%. I mean, it was ridiculous. Flash forward to today. I own the booking process. What's my vacancy rate? My vacancy rate is maybe 15%, which isn't bad. I've had people claim that they're getting a vacancy rate of only 5% on their vacation rentals. I tend to call BS on those. I ask folks if they're willing to submit. Let me take a look at the numbers or take a look at the bookings and see, because when I go, for instance, when I was shopping for a property manager, I had someone who said they would guarantee me a 90% or a 10% vacancy rate or 90% occupancy rate. And I go, so in writing you're willing to do that? And I said, no, just be, we'll make a verbal agreement that I will do that. And I said, well, what happens if you don't achieve that? And they're like, well, we just work harder to make it happen. So it was the kind of guarantee that's not a guarantee at all. And when I went and looked at their properties up on websites that they had them listed, I found that they weren't getting a 90% occupancy rate if you just looked at the calendar that they had up there, right? If you looked at the bookings for the month we were in, they weren't getting a 90%. They were getting about 80, maybe 85%. And that's what I tend to see. I get some months where I get booked almost completely, which are great, which brings me up about 90%. But if we're averaging it, it's probably 80 to 85%. Okay. And at that, it does exceptionally well. The property pays for itself, plus kicks off a little bit. I tend to put a pretty good chunk of change into the fund to keep the property up to date. This is a tropical environment. There's salt air, and of course all of those things should be taken into account with any property you're looking at. Figure out what things will likely cost you more money because of where the property is located. So here I'm dealing with rust on everything, right? Every time I come, I'm checking every electrical outlet, switch, light fixture, everything for rust and things that make it dangerous, right? The one thing you want to make sure you're doing is making sure your property is safe for the folks who stay there. All right. And which is one thing I'm doing on this visit. I've spent the first week, sanding and painting refrigerators, fixing drapes, adjusting conduit, replacing light fixtures, replacing a TV. I mean, there's all kinds of things that I've been doing. And that's another part of the equation that is a little bit of a pain in the butt. If you decide to take the route that will make you a lot more money, you need to own a lot more of the process. So in my relationship with my property manager, they do not send me a check. I send them a check. So all they do is get a email from me telling them, these are the folks who are going to be arriving. Here's the date and time of their arrival. And that's it. That's all they get. And then at the end of the month, I write them a check. The other thing that's a bummer is I have to own, particularly in the state of Hawaii. Now this will change from state to state, but the state of Hawaii is very dominated, for instance, by the hotel industry. So they are constantly creating rules and regulations that are designed to stifle the personal renting of homes for vacation rentals. So I have to do a bizarre monthly tax thing for Hawaii, and then a tax thing at the end of the year. Even though I'm not a resident, I pay property taxes, so all they should care about is my property taxes, but I'm required to pay all these various taxes relating to people staying in the unit, which is fine. I do it, and that's great. It's just a burden to the process, but again, something you should be aware of in your own state. If you have a state that is very dominated by tourism and hotels and those types of things, there's likely to be the same things in play for you. Okay. So for all of this effort, you're going to end up making a lot more money. And I think that this argument can be made for just about any vacation property. If you're someone who owns a property or is looking at a property and you see that the vacation option will actually put you into positive cash flow, that could completely change the strategy that you might want to implement for that property. You might come up with a strategy where because it's a great way to transition, right? So and that's one thing that I've been doing with this property is I take a chunk of the money that I make every month and I put it into paying the mortgage early. So if I could have this free and clear, this would be a huge money maker in terms of monthly cash flow. So one thing that I do is and then once I do that, I could have it be the less annoying long-term rental version and still make a really good chunk of change off of that. Now, as long as I'm got the patience and the willingness to deal with it as a vacation rental, I'll probably keep doing that just because of the benefit I get in terms of increased earning power. But if you're someone who wants to get yourself into a situation where you have less of a headache and you don't really have to worry about a property manager because you can own the process of getting someone into that vacation property as a long-term renter, I think it's a great strategy that you can use as a transition step from being a vacation rental to being a long-term rental. And also, markets could change. One thing that has changed since I first acquired this place is that rental rates have gone up. Now, they haven't gone up to the point where I can ask in rent the amount it costs me to hold the property, but we're getting there. It used to be about $400 away. Now it's about $150 to $200 away from being able to do that. So if for some reason I wanted to completely take a break from worrying about scheduling people and dealing with all of that stuff, I could easily do that, probably in another 2 or 3 years, depending on how much growth there is in local rents. Given my understanding of my local marketplace, it's likely to happen as more and more things start happening on this side of the island. Okay, so the goal here for you is opening up horizons in terms of your ability to analyze properties, figure out if it's something that could be used as a vacation rental. And you're probably thinking, well, Robert, you're using this kind of dramatic example of tropical islands, you're getting a property on the water. That really doesn't make sense for my business model. Well, maybe not. You might be surprised to discover the desirability of your community in terms of a vacation rental. So never discount it, because it costs you nothing aside from a few minutes to do the analysis. Now, how would you do it? Simply go to a site like VRBO or HomeAway or any other site you prefer and enter in your city and look up vacation rentals. You will be stunned to discover how many properties are listed there as vacation rentals. Now, you can do Airbnb if you like, all of those. I don't have any firsthand experience with Airbnb. I have some investors who love Airbnb. I have some investors who I've talked to who have pretty bad stories about Airbnb and stopped doing Airbnb in favor of doing VRBO and HomeAway style listings. That's really up to you, depending on your opinion of those. I've had really good experience with VRBO so far, so I'm probably going to stick with that. But keeping vacation renting as an option can be a great gateway if you can't find a way to make a deal work through conventional renting, through long-term renting. This could be a great way for you to add to your holdings in a way that offsets what you wouldn't make as a long-term rental with what you would make as a vacation rental. Now, of course, the goal is always going to be to create a deal that works as a long-term rental. If it'll work as a long-term rental, odds are it would work even better as a vacation rental, except for those scenarios where, for whatever reason, there really is no vacation rental market in your local area. So the math should be focusing on that. In fact, if you're buying a property for that purpose, that should be the approach that you take, using it as a tool to drive down the purchase price. Because remember, we make our money when we purchase the home, not when we sell it. It's about buying right. Selling is great and wonderful, and you need to do what you need to do at that time. But the only way you're really going to reap the rewards of investment is if you buy smartly. So I don't want you to use this as a scenario where it makes no sense to buy as a long-term rental. It makes some sense as a vacation rental, but you end up paying a price that is still too high for someone who's investment-minded. You shouldn't be paying what would be considered full market value for a property. You should be out there really trying to aggressively market. And if that means you're making 50 offers for every one that gets accepted, just be willing to do that. Be willing to walk away. This is a math equation. Don't fall in love with any of these properties. Let the numbers tell you, but also really run the numbers. Run those, I'm going to put this out there as a long-term rental scenario and the potential vacation rental scenario, because it could be a great way for you to get into the market that you hadn't considered before. All right, folks. I think that's about it for today. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I have to say on the subject. This is the Rebel Broker, reaching out to you from beautiful Oahu, Hawaii. I think I'm going to get into my suit and put my butt into the Pacific Ocean and have a little fun time. I do appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I have to say on these subjects. I hope, as always, that I've provided you with more value in terms of things to think about, things to consider that you might not have before, than time you invested in the show. Always hoping to do that. Thanks again for listening. Aloha, and I'll talk to y'all next time.